Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to day 2 of Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture, our first ever conference. I'm your host, registered professional counselor and religious recovery consultant, Janice Selby. I like to start each day when I'm doing events with a land and treaty acknowledgement because I am joining you from Canada. It's my privilege to be joining you today from the unceded territory of the Syilx people in what is now known as the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, Canada. I invite you to learn more about traditional lands and treaties by visiting www.native-land.ca. At the Shameless Sexuality Conference, we are committed to safer spaces and to ensuring that everything we do is accessible to everyone, even online. To establish safety in this place, please note that racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, or harassment of any kind, including religious proselytizing, will not be tolerated, either in the sessions or in the chat. If at any time you experience such harassment or would like to make any comments regarding safer spaces at the Shameless Sexuality Conference, you can send a private message or email me personally at janice.selby@gmail.com. Finally, today I want you to take care of yourself. If you're feeling triggered or overwhelmed at any time during the conference, please feel free to take a break. With all the sessions being recorded, you can rest assured you won't miss any of the teaching taking place. Now, I'm very pleased to tell you about our opening speaker today. Mandisa Thomas grew up in New York City in a non-religious home, but with a staunchly religious grandmother. When Mandisa moved with her husband to Atlanta, cultural factors made it difficult to lead a secular life. This issue contributed to her founding Black Nonbelievers, Inc., an organization that empowers and supports Blacks living free from faith. I've had the honor of interacting with Mandisa as a speaker at the conferences on religious trauma and also interviewing her on the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm really pleased that today Mandisa will be sharing with us some of her own confessions of a good girl from the projects. Welcome, Mandisa.
Thank you very much, Janice. And thank you once again for having me for the Shameless Sexuality Conference. I am very excited to be here and to be speaking with you and all of the attendees. Thank you so much for being here and supporting this event. That is very, very important. As Janice said, my name is Mandisa Thomas, and I am going to get into my presentation because I know we have a limited amount of time and there is a lot of ground that I will be covering. And so with that, I will be sharing my screen for my presentation because I do like to give visuals to everyone. And much of what I will be discussing today is autobiographical. I will be sharing aspects of my life and how it pertains to where I am as far as my sexuality and where I know others may have struggled and coming to terms with as well. So the title of my talk is Confessions of a Good Girl from the Projects. And I will start with a bit more about, I will need to start with an advisory first. This talk does contain sensitive information that may not be suitable for all attendees. It will include some explicit language, some graphic details, and also some suggestive language and images. So just for fair warning, and for those who, if you're ready for it, great. But like Janice said in the beginning, if you want to take a break, because I'm about to get real here, definitely. So just a bit more about me. For those of you who may have attended the conference on religious trauma, and since then, I've had the opportunity to participate in the Billboard campaign with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. This is me at the location in the Atlanta, Georgia area, which was at the corner of Cortlandt Street and John Wesley Dobbs, if you are familiar with downtown Atlanta. And it was a part of the I Am Secular and I Vote campaign. And the image here you see, it says, I'm an atheist and I vote. And I was very, very proud to be a part of that campaign, as we are partners with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And this also included a newspaper ad as well. And I was featured in other ads that were featured in Mississippi and also Maryland. And so this just, if nothing else, it shows you my dedication and commitment to this community, as well as the atheist and secular identities. So as Janice said, I am the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, which is headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I was born and raised in New York City with a pretty non-religious background. My paternal grandmother was very, very religious, but my maternal grandmother was not. And she is where I derive much of my non-religious inspiration from. And there's also another story to be said here about even her life and her life with my grandfather, both my grandmothers, actually. I'll get into that a little later. At the time that Black Nonbelievers was formed or created, I was working full time as the event services manager at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, right next to Emory University in the Atlanta area. In 2018, I resigned from that position to take on activism and running Black Nonbelievers full time, because that was where it was determined where my time and dedication, or a huge portion of it, needed to be. And so with that, you see a Patreon link at the bottom of the picture, which helps further support my activism, because it is still primarily on a volunteer basis. And this work deserves to be supported. It does depend on your patronage, both personally and through my organization, but I'll get into that later as well. In addition to running Black Nonbelievers, I also serve on the boards for American Atheists and the American Humanist Association, as well as an organization called Humanist Global Charity. I was the recipient of the Secular Student Alliance's Backbone Award in 2019, as well as the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Free Thought Heroine Award that same year. I was also the Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association's Person of the Year in 2018. In 2020, I was a co-recipient of the Harvard Humanist of the Year Award, along with Sikivu Hutchinson and Ijoma Aluo. This year, I was the recipient of the Irving and Annabelle Wolfson Award, which is presented by the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Worcester, Massachusetts. I am also a certified humanist celebrant, which means I can perform weddings, memorials, and other life services. So if this is something that you are interested in procuring from me, please feel free to reach out to me, whether it is through this conference or whether it is through direct contact. I will be more than happy to assist you. I always say that I didn't get involved in this community for the recognition, but it is nice when it comes. So unlike a lot of people in this community, I don't come from, and it may be similar to or like a lot of people in this community, I don't come from economic privilege. I come from, this is my hood. There's a picture of it. I was born and raised in New York City in a housing development called South Jamaica Houses in Jamaica, Queens. It is commonly known as 40 projects. And there are housing projects all across the United States, in New York City. Interestingly enough, some of the construction, I learned over the years, some of the construction was contracted out to companies that were backed by the New York Mafia, which was very, very interesting to learn. But my particular neighborhood was one of the most notorious housing projects in the 1970s and the 1980s. And when you grow up in a neighborhood like this, you are exposed to a lot. You are exposed and you witness, or you are even directly impacted by drugs, other crime, and other. But I was also surrounded by a lot of love. I'm actually a second generation. Both my parents grew up in this neighborhood. Both sets of my grandparents lived here. They relocated there from Manhattan to Queens, like a lot of Black families did. And so, over the course of the years, I grew up with a lot of cousins. I have two brothers, and on both sides of my family, they were pretty large. So we had one of the largest families in the neighborhood. And, there were aspects of my childhood that were a lot of fun, lots of family reunions, lots of gatherings, and just in the neighborhood, there is a culture that you grow up with, especially when you are coming from, this type of neighborhood. And it's one that I'm not ashamed of. It is one that I am, that I carry with me. I can't escape it. I would never pretend that I come from this, this fairy tale life, because it wasn't that. However, I was exposed to a lot and experienced a lot growing up, and it has shaped my worldview. It certainly has shaped the way I do activism. It has been instrumental in the strong person that I am, because you had to be. You could not be from this neighborhood and not be tough. You just couldn't. And, so I carry this with me, and I bring it to the table with my activism, and I share it with all of you. However, unlike, my mother she was actually quite progressive for her time. Now, this is my maternal grandmother, Ethel May Welch, who I credit with a lot of my secular upbringing and secular inspiration. So she was a native of New Orleans, came to New York City, met my grandfather, got pregnant, and, she came up to New York to go to school, ended up having 11 children. And, my mother in this was one of the more progressive of her siblings. She raised me and my brothers with an Afrocentric background and a lens of what it meant to be, proud to be Black and to be proud of our heritage. And education was a huge focus. Also, not simply being a result of the destructive aspects of our neighborhood. So she had us in a lot of programs. This is me for my sixth grade graduation picture. And so, as you can tell, I was immaculately dressed. She was, and this is my older brother in this picture. And our father passed away earlier this year. And he sent me that picture, and he said, "These are the faces of innocence." And he was right, because my brother and I actually both of my brothers and I had there were aspects of our childhood that were very tumultuous. Our parents split when we were young. Their separation was not amicable, and we were caught in the middle of that. So in between all of these, and I was in a lot of cultural programs, as you can see in the picture with me with all the kente cloth. I was in a lot of poetry. I was in singing. I was in dance. So there were a lot of things that I was in that occupied my childhood. But of course, I could not escape the aspects of my life that included, dealing with my parents' separation, dealing with abuse at the hands of my mother, physical abuse and mental and emotional abuse. So those were ways that I found that I did cope through my childhood, and also growing and developing and seeing a lot of things in my neighborhood. There were a number of my peers who did not live, they were either incarcerated or they were killed. So, I grew up, that was a part of my reality growing up in this neighborhood. And it is because of that I did mature early. So for all of my mother's good intentions to try to shelter me or keep me from that part of the neighborhood, I did become aware of sexual desire, before my preteens. Part of this was being exposed to certain things from from my family, hearing the whispers. I found out early that both of my grandfathers had other children outside of their marriages. So these were things that I became very much aware of as a child. And my mother, even in her progressive lens and her focus on education, did talk to me about basics about my period, what it meant to, go through a pelvic exam, and telling me that my body may have been ready for sex, but that mentally I probably was not. So we didn't really have a good comprehensive discussion about what it meant to be ready for sex. She just said I had plenty of time for that. And when I thought about it, I'm like, well, what the fuck did that mean? So, but there were some things that she actually had a subscription to Essence magazine when I was younger. And Essence magazine has some really, really good articles and really, really good things that especially focus on Black women. They had a sexual health column. And so, and it talked about aspects of relationships. I would read the fictional stories in there along with other, the other information. So it was very, very good for me. I would read that on my own. I was an avid reader as a child. So there were things that I was reading that may not have been age appropriate, or that it may not have been, I may or may not have been perceived to understand it, but I actually could. But I actually first had sex at the age of 13. It was be considered losing my virginity. And it was with one of my brother's friends. He was 16 years old at the time. And I will say that, my experiences did not include, it did not have any what would be considered illegal. So everything I did that happened was with people within my own age group, which says a lot about how we all sort of matured ahead of our time. So yes, I first had sex at age 13 in an apartment above a church. And it was interesting because the next day I had my heart broken by the same person. I found out I was told that I was warned that he was seeing other girls. We happened to have sex, and the next day that was confirmed. So that was another aspect of me growing up early and having to deal with my feelings about that early. And I did have experiences with oral sex and also being watched having sex that same year. My second partner was actually through a friend of mine who had sex with that guy as well. And so we all talked about it, and we went back to her apartment where she lived, and she watched us. And for some reason, it wasn't weird to me, but we all remained friends after that. So it was just very interesting. But also I was sexually assaulted twice when I was 16. That same guy who was that second partner, the first one, that was a gang rape. I was lured into an apartment, which I learned later was a crack house. I was only supposed to have sex with him, but then some of his friends came, and, I ended up being gang raped. And that was actually quite unfortunately common in that neighborhood as well. And when I reconnected with that guy years later, and we talked about it, and he said the other girls didn't like it, I told him, because it was rape. Y'all raped us. And it's interesting that they were lucky. I had an uncle who was a very well-known drug dealer in the neighborhood. And, he almost went after them. He almost went after him. So it was like, first of all, y'all shouldn't have been doing that. Y'all shouldn't have been luring us into that situation. And possibly because we were all victims in a lot of ways. But, I had to explain to him later that it was rape. And I had to come to terms later with that was rape, because I was also shamed for even going there. And also, I was raped in my high school. I attended a very prestigious high school of music and art and performing arts. But of course, that doesn't mean that, that didn't mean that I didn't escape that there either. So I was sexually assaulted by age 16. And unfortunately, that isn't uncommon as well with a lot of people. So I had to deal and grapple with that growing up, in addition to everything that I was dealing with in my childhood. And this goes into the problem of sex education or lack thereof, especially in low income neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. Because the problem with that, and we know that in a lot of states, there is an emphasis on abstinence only education, purity culture, this idea of, well, you're supposed to keep your legs closed, but then it is, in our neighborhoods, in a lot of ways, we are over sexualized. You hear it in the music. You hear it in a lot of ways. I remember being approached by older men as a young girl. And I developed early. You can't see them here, but you might be able to see them in the pictures. My breasts developed very early as a young girl. And so that meant that there were older guys watching me, in addition to those in addition to my peers. So there were a lot of the, R. Kelly types. R. Kelly is just infamous because of, his career. But there were a lot of good-looking older guys in my neighborhood who did approach me. Fortunately, I never had, I never really cared for older guys, though. And my mom was strict on me, but it didn't stop me from running around and doing certain things. I just knew I never wanted to do them with older men. Unfortunately, there were a lot of other young girls who got caught up in that. They got pregnant by some of these older guys. They may have caught STIs from some of these older guys and guys their age. Certainly, a lot of my cousins were pregnant and had children by the time they were 15, 16, 17 years old. So that I grew up around a lot of that. And also sexual assault. And it wasn't just the girls who were being assaulted. It was also young boys. And so there were these kinds of conversations and these whispers. There is a lack of comprehensive sex education. It's always you being fast, or these fast ass girls, or these fast ass little boys, but not helping us understand why. And seeing the things that are happening with us, but not just gossiping about it, or just, maybe because their parents did it. So there was a lot of that. There's also continued stigma and shame against women and LGBTQ plus persons. Now, I remember one time I remember saying that I had never encountered a transgender person in my neighborhood, and that wasn't true. There was a transgender woman named Stephanie that my mother told me about. And she sat in the neighborhood right along with the other neighborhood women and would talk. And, my mother told me that her name used to be Stephen, but now she's Stephanie. And she looked really good. She looked really, really good. You couldn't tell. I mean, you could kind of tell by the voice, but she was a part of the neighborhood just like everyone else. No one mistreated her from what I could see. No one shamed her for what I could see, but she eventually passed away, and I think she passed away from AIDS, from what I was told. Which lets me, there are transgender folks who are at a disadvantage and who live in these neighborhoods, but who may also be accepted by the neighborhood. So, but it's again just the whispers that you may hear. There is also a continued shaming of women and girls. It's always the girls, or when the girls get pregnant, it somehow was their fault. Where are the young men in this equation? And also, where are the men who might be getting these girls pregnant in this situation? And there is little to no objective discussions about sex and sexual desire, birth control options, etc. I remember my paternal grandmother, she raised my father and my aunts and uncles very strict. But when they got, in these streets and started having sex and got pregnant, they were encouraged to marry even abusive partners and have these children. But no discussions about birth control, no discussions about actually what it means to date and actually develop a relationship. I know my mother never discussed that with me, what it meant to actually have a boy court me or have dates, or, most of the time it just went straight to sex. And I think that was part of my rebellion in a way. So there is a problem when it comes to that portion. And this impacts all of us, especially those of us who come from these low income neighborhoods where we already have a bunch of strikes against us when it comes to societal, how things impact people and women of color, often how assaults against young Black women and young Black LGBTQ folks go unnoticed or they go unreported. And part of that is because of the culture of the neighborhood. So these are things that we need to be aware of. And so what can we do to try to combat this? It is important to empathize with each other. Many of us have grown or have been indoctrinated into households and communities where sex is not discussed comprehensively in a way that helps us better understand our bodies and our feelings and how to deal with that. It is also important to listen and learn. There is a lot that can be learned from those of us who come from these neighborhoods and what we've had to endure, what we've had to deal with, and the things that we have seen that others may not have encountered. It's important for us to tell our stories. I know that even though I grew up in a economically disadvantaged neighborhood, it doesn't mean that my experience was any different from someone who may have come from a privileged or a household that where they came from means, or a more supportive, at least seemingly supportive household. So it's important for us to tell our stories and educate each other, and also that goes to educate ourselves. And this means even re-educating ourselves, examining our privilege and the potential biases, because even if you may not have noticed or even understood that these things happen in our neighborhoods, it's important to understand and dissect that we're still human beings. We're not just simply robots or that we can't understand, but it does make a difference. Our upbringing and our environments do make a difference as to how this is approached. Also offer resources and support that's always needed, and also validate each other. Let's support each other in the things that we are dealing with, that we may still be struggling with, especially as if we've come out of abusive, whether they were physical, sexual, emotional, and mental, and sometimes it's all four. Sometimes it's all four. Sometimes it's more than one. And oftentimes it's more than one. They go hand in hand. It's important for us to validate each other and show that we understand, we get it. We can talk to each other and support each other and just say, you know what, I'm here for you. That validation is important. And I've noticed that sometimes as women, we are the hardest on each other. We are still in a very patriarchal society where it is easier for women to turn on each other rather than go to the root of the problem. It doesn't mean that we aren't held accountable, because we do need to be. But just examining our biases on that. So coming from what was supposed to be a good girl to being a wiser adult, a wiser woman, I was fortunate that I had the critical thinking. I was indoctrinated and raised with the tools to critically think, even if it didn't necessarily go my mother's way, to take that my education and information and my experiences also and being able to advise my children differently. I don't have a relationship with my mother at all. It is by choice. I have chosen to not allow a level of toxicity into my life from her. And I also had to come to terms with the fact that I was never going to have a good relationship with my parents, because they made decisions as adults that impacted me and my brothers, that we were supposed to carry that weight, and that we were supposed to still honor them, even though they did not honor us. And so with that, I took that and tried to do try to do differently with my children. My daughter and I have a much better relationship because I was open and honest with her, and not shaming her about what she went through. So she and I have a much better relationship than my mother and I do. And, my sons are teenagers now. There's some learning curves there. There are some challenges there. But the thing is that it's definitely an unconventional learning experience for them. I also had the opportunity to heal from my own trauma and stigma, and I'm still learning from it. I am still healing from it. There was never a time where I didn't think a lot as a kid, and the same thing is true as an adult. The thing is now that I am able to, as an adult, break away from those childhood stigmas of, well, stay in a child's place. There was a certain amount of power and agency that I wasn't supposed to have as a kid. And as I grew into my adulthood, I wasn't supposed to have that either. So I had to take that back. And also coming to terms with my own sexuality and desires and embracing them. They aren't much different than when I was a teenager. I realized that there were aspects of my childhood that I was ahead of my time there. But I was able to take that along with support from others and say, I can embrace my sexuality. My mother, and when I was younger, she would never allow anyone to tell me that I was pretty. And so I became self-conscious about my looks at an early age because I certainly did not fit the conventional mold of what it meant to be pretty. And I guess I did, but she tried so hard to go the other way that, I wasn't allowed to embrace my physical attributes. And so as an adult, which led to me overeating, it led to me stressing out. And so as I come out of that, I am able to embrace my information and my education on sex and sexuality while still being sexy. And I love the picture in this photo shoot was from a shoot from 2012, which was supposed to be for a calendar. When the organization Secular Woman was first founded, they were going to do a calendar that featured nude to partially nude and sexually suggestive pictures. And I love nudity. I love nudity for myself. I love looking at nude bodies. And so I really wanted to participate in this project. So for me, unfortunately, it didn't come to pass, but I shared those photos on Facebook and on social media. And when I tell you that, it was liberating for me. I was able to see myself in a different light, that showed that I am not just simply my intellect. I am not just simply my skill, but I also can embrace my looks. I can be, I can be sexy. I can, and with consent, for myself. I had to give myself consent for that. And it doesn't mean that people can violate me, but I can also appreciate me and allow others to appreciate me as well. So it really helped take on another trajectory for myself, and to allow, and there were other people who said they felt inspired because, as a full-figured, especially a full-figured Black woman, we're still not supposed to celebrate our bodies. We're supposed to be ashamed of them. We're supposed to, fit that model mold, and not all of us do. So, and sexy isn't just a look, it is a state of mind, but you can incorporate that into how you look. So this was I had to come to terms with that and accept that and embrace that for myself. And so that others around me, the people who are in my community, the people who look at me to, as an example, I can follow, and I try to practice what I preach. I try to lead by example. I let people know I'm not perfect and that is okay, because I'm okay with I don't like respectability politics. It is not okay to just be this good girl. It is okay to be a bad bitch. It's okay to be all of those things. And also, value the principles of evidence and to be intelligent and to be intellectual. They can all encompass and be, you can be all of those things. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And that was a part of my childhood and my adulthood that I happily embrace. And so it has made me all the better because of it. Again, it's not a perfect struggle or it's not a perfect progress. It's a journey, but it's still a journey that I'm very proud of. And so here are a few recommendations for people, because I don't like to leave you with just that. There's a book called A Little Black Book for Girls and A Little Black Book for Guys. Talk about healthy sexuality, especially as teenagers, to not shame them, to not talk at them. And also, one of my favorite coming of age resources is The Color Purple. I am very partial to the movie by Alice Walker, which was directed by Steven Spielberg. The book is in the form of a diary, but it is an extremely, it covers a lot of subjects: racism, molestation, embracing your sexuality, coming to terms with yourself, getting out of an abusive relationship. If you've never seen this movie or never read this book, I highly recommend it. It is a powerful piece if you've never seen it. And I remember watching it as a young girl and being able to appreciate it more every time I saw it. Because, there were aspects of it that, of course, me being younger, I had to, it may not have been, I may not have been able to understand it fully as a child, but, as an adult, there was a lot that I could see and understand. So never be afraid to listen to your teenagers. Teenagers know more than we think. I've had to deal with this recently with my own teenage son, who has the same maturity level that I did at that age. And it's important to listen to them. It is important for us as adults to never stop learning, never stop processing ourselves. And it's important to live life for ourselves, not just simply for our families and the communities around us. We have a right to be empowered for ourselves. And so with that, I would like to invite you all to follow and subscribe to Black Nonbelievers on social media. And also do donate and support if you can. My work does depend on your patronage and support for this organization, where we can have discussions and conversations like this. The Women of Color Beyond Belief conference that we just co-hosted, had a wonderful panel on exploring sex and sexuality unapologetically and exuberantly, which is still a very, very important and volatile topic, especially for women of color. So this helps me in my activism, because I come from that disadvantaged neighborhood that many in our communities are trying to reach. And so we bring our perspectives with us, and we are coming into leadership, and we hope you're ready. So with that, thank you very much. And I think there's a few moments for questions.
That I just enjoyed your talk so much, Mandisa. Your frankness is so refreshing and contagious. I feel like I grew up in a different situation, but boy, there were some real similarities there. And yeah, I see that we have a question that's come in. How did you recover from being raped at such a young age?
So the second time, when it happened in high school, I actually had more support than I realized. One of my classmates, when I told her and a group of people about, first of all, it took for her to tell me, when I told her what happened, she said, Mandisa, he raped you. And it didn't register to me. It didn't dawn on me that is what happened, because I went with this person willingly and it went wrong very quickly. It went south very quickly. And so at first I said I wasn't going to say anything. But then when I told another one of my friends, he dragged me down to the dean's office. He was like, no, we are not going to let this go. We're not going to let this slide. And so, and I was grateful for that. I was grateful that I had a support system of my peers who said, no, he can't get away with this. And I was afraid to tell my mother because I knew in the back of my mind, and in a way she kind of did it too. In a way she implied, well, what the fuck were you doing there with him? You know, like, why were you there? You know, like what business did you have being with this boy when you should have been in class? You know, stuff like that. So I actually did not want to say anything. However, through the additional support from my family, she didn't just come out and say that. You know, she did show some support, but it was my peers who showed a lot of support. But the one thing they did say was that, you know, because I was sexually active and I actually was unapologetic about it, but in a way, you know, I did need to see myself as more valuable than to just simply let anyone touch me or, you know, or to be, you know, or to just, you know, let them do anything they wanted to me. But at the same time, I was like, well, I also was still unapologetic about, you know, being sexually active as well. At least, and I could be that outside of my house. I could be that with my own peers. So it really was through the support of my, I can't say that I got much support with the gang rape, even though later on in life, I was able to talk about it and I was able to put that into perspective. But the second time it happened, I had a lot of support through my classmates and my friends.
I'm so glad that you had that support. It does make all the difference. We have a comment here as well. Thank you so much, Mandisa, for sharing your story. Purity culture is coded very white and middle class, but its impact goes far beyond that. So your story is so important for disrupting our assumptions about its impact.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And it really does. You know, there are a lot of, I grew up seeing a lot of, and even my own mother, right? I've seen a lot of people who put on this face to the public, but in private, they do something different. And hypocrisy, I cannot stand it. I really can't. And that is what purity culture does tend to, you know, it tends to make that pervasive, right? You know, because you're not supposed to be your true, authentic self, especially when it comes to sex and sexuality. And if you are, you're a hoe. You know, you are, you know, you're you know, I remember, you know, I have some of my issues with the Group 2 Live crew, but I also love them.
Yeah.
I wasn't supposed to like the booty shaking, you know, because that was women degrading themselves, right? You know, they weren't supposed to. And in truth, there are a lot of women now who coming out and saying that there was a lot of assault back then.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were a lot of women who were taken advantage of. But I mean, that doesn't mean that they were completely robbed of their agency. You know, they may have had a choice and it may have felt good to them to do that. You know, do we shame sex workers? Do we shame strippers because we think, oh, that's beneath us? And I don't think it is. You know, I think if there are women who, and I love going to strip clubs. I do. And I can appreciate a woman who can dance better than me, you know, and who is not afraid to, you know, express that, you know, get that money, you know, make that, it's okay to do that. You know, if I had a better understanding of what I could be, and especially with the body I had, maybe I would have taken advantage of that. So you know, it's about putting things into a perspective so that people are empowered to do what they want to do.
Yes.
Even if it means doing something that you may not necessarily agree with. But if it feels good for them, if that expression feels good to them, then so be it.
Yes. Oh, 100%. The autonomy piece is just huge. And there is something beautiful about people owning their own bodies, just unabashedly, whatever shape we are, however we look, it's ours. It's what we've got. So, wow, this was just such a fascinating and really inspiring talk. Thank you. I feel encouraged that I can also tell my story with frankness. I'm allowed to do it, and it can help other people who maybe haven't had the freedom to do that before. So thank you very much. I've just really enjoyed your time with us. And yeah, people just seem to be quite happy with what you've said. One person had asked again about resources for sex education, and you listed The Color Purple. I love that movie as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the books. There was a book for girls and a book for boys.
Yes, a healthy. What was it now? Let me look at it again through my presentation here. It's the little black book for girls and a little black book for guys. They're both available on Amazon. So just a heads up on that. And the publisher is St. Stephen's Community House. Okay. Yeah, if you type that in, it should come up.
Thanks for those resources, and thanks for making time in your very busy schedule to come here with this presentation. It was excellent. I really appreciate it. And everyone, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in 15 minutes.